So welcome to season 3, episode 3 of Chebacco Chats. I'm Jenna Jandreau, your host today, and I'm speaking to Betsy Hewlett about the Eagle Lake Lodge, the missing Carriage Road gatehouse, which is the subject of her article in the upcoming edition of Chebacco. So we are using a webinar format today. So while you can see and hear us, we cannot see or hear our audience. We do invite you to ask questions and send comments using the chat or Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screens. Or if you're using Facebook Live to join us today, you can comment on the video. And I will address questions throughout the chat. So I am excited to welcome back to Chebacco Chats, Betsy Hewlett, a retired administrator of local area nonprofits, including the Land and Garden Preserve and the Maine Community Foundation. Betsy has a Bachelor of Arts in History and graduate degrees in Education. She writes and researches local landscape history with an enthusiasm for locating original source materials that shed new light on the current and past beauty of Mount Desert Island. So welcome, Betsy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jenna.
Yes, so I am going to share my screen and we will get started. How's this looking? Can you see my screen? Here we are. So I'd like to get started by orienting us to the same places on Mount Desert Island. So this will inform our imaginations a bit as we settle into this talk, and we will consider what if there was a third Carriage Road gatehouse on MDI. So we have these two photographs of beautiful brick structures here. Can you tell me what these are?
Sure, and I would imagine everyone that's on board today with us is recognizing some very familiar faces here. On the left on the screen is the Brown Mountain Gatehouse. This gatehouse was built in 1932. It is on the hill that goes down from Norumbega Mountain into Northeast Harbor on Route 198. The picture on the right is the gatehouse that abuts it's the gate that abuts the gatehouse at Jordan Pond House on the Loop Road within Acadia National Park. Both of these structures were built at about the same time, 1932. They were designed by architect Grosvenor Atterbury. They were financed by John D. Rockefeller Jr. They were built on private property that he owned. He saw through the construction, he approved it, he was excited about it, and within a year or so, he had donated both of these structures and the adjoining land to Acadia National Park.
So what was the purpose and the plan behind these structures and the potential third structure that Rockefeller and Atterbury were kind of aiming for?
Well, these two structures were built as gatehouses that would provide housing for a family or maintaining the gate that was a terminus point for the carriage roads that were being built by Mr. Rockefeller and later turned over to the park. So these two entry points were important for maintaining that the carriage roads would only be used by walkers and horses, carriages, and that motorized vehicles would not be allowed onto the carriage roads. So I think there was some intent here to have a very active process of an individual who would open the gate and let you through and then shut the gate so that no trespassers or no motorized vehicles would come aboard. So what the third gatehouse, where it differs a bit from these two, is that the third gatehouse was intended to be at the north end of Eagle Lake, and it was intended to be a public facility. It was not housing for a gatekeeper. In fact, that northern terminus at the park on Eagle Lake that you see here in yellow, there's a yellow blob on a very cursory map that shows you where that third gatehouse was planned for. And it was to be a public facility that would be accessed both by road, the Eagle Lake Road, and by trail, which would have been the carriage road that currently circumvents or surrounds Eagle Lake. And you could come by horseback, you could come by foot that way, or you could come by road. And it was planned to have parking facilities and ways that the public could access it from various methods. So it was not just a house, it was a public facility, and it included plans for parking. It had a septic system, it had a sewage system, it had public restrooms, and it was huge and not intended to allow any of those cars through the gate, however, at that point, because there was a small gatehouse just to the left of this structure that probably was intended to keep motorized vehicles from the Eagle Lake Road from accessing the carriage roads. So it was Atterbury's idea, with Mr. Rockefeller's support, wholehearted support, to create a very planned community here. In other words, the three terminus and carriage roads were, it was a version of a planned community that was only for the culture of recreation and leisure. So this Grosvenor Atterbury that you see in the photograph here, he's standing on a mountain above a village in France, and it was part of his study in France towards architectural degree, that he became very enamored with the idea of planned communities. And he's not alone in this at that time frame. This photo was taken in 1900, and by 1909, Atterbury had been hired to design a community called Forest Hill Gardens that's now a part of Queens, just outside of Manhattan. And he was working with the Olmsted brothers by 1909 on planning that community. It was 40 acres. It encompassed everything from stores to schools to libraries, roads, parks, the whole shtick. And so Grosvenor Atterbury is not just an architect known for structures that are residential. He had a much wider scope, and he was much more interested in community than just architectural beauty. He was a bit stuck in a style that definitely reflects his love of French architecture. So we see on the island that he brought three structures, or wanted to have three structures, two actually came to fruition, that were designed in the French country style that he knew well. He had also done these many structures for other families, including beyond the Rockefellers, in this same style. And he had been first hired by Rockefeller to lay out the farm that we now know as Stone Barn Farm in Tarrytown, New York. So the structures there were also in the French country style. So Atterbury's an interesting guy, and I think probably what is very interesting to me here in his importance is that he and Rockefeller started corresponding around 1917. So there was a long friendship. They were very close in age. Atterbury was 5 years older than Rockefeller. And I think the two of them had a very simpatico way of looking at community and how the carriage roads and these gatehouses would look on the landscape of MDI.
So let's talk a little bit about the look of the third gatehouse. This is an architectural drawing of the first floor plan of Eagle Lake Lodge by Atterbury. So you said he started speaking, corresponding with Rockefeller in 1917, and I see that this is 1931. So they had a long-going client-patron relationship.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about this drawing. What are we looking at here?
Well, this is a recreation and leisure extravaganza. I think if you count up all of the square feet in the 3 stories that were built, this is the first floor. Underneath this floor is also another partial floor that is on the left-hand side of the drawing that would encompass the stables. And then the entire structure has another floor, second floor above it. There's also a 3rd floor, but the 3rd floor is basically under the roof and under the eaves. But if you put all of the square feet of these 3 floors together, it comes up to about a 40,000 square foot building. It was huge, absolutely huge. And across the front of the lake, which is the top of the blueprint, is going to be Eagle Lake. It doesn't show here the outline of the lake, but that little terrace that's going, yes, off of that end is Eagle Lake. The other side is a curved entryway that was for motor traffic to come in and let guests off at the door. And then the cars would have to go to a parking lot, which was conceived to be across the Eagle Lake Road, which is now what we see as the Beaver Pond there. That was originally going to be a parking lot, and it was also the septic and sewage system for this edifice.
So we think of it as the Beaver Pond area now. Was it environmentally similar at that time to the way it is now, or has that changed?
No, actually it was very similar. And just to the right of the Beaver Pond was a quarry. And that quarry was also going to be part of this plan in terms of parking, septic, sewage, outbuildings. And interesting, just quickly, as I look from left to right here on this first floor, it's hard to see the words in the small print, but on the left is a stable. And above the stable are quarters for changing clothes, for people that work for the horses. There were a couple of rooms where the horse masters could go and chill out while their people were inside having a cup of tea. Then you move to the right, and about from 1/3 to 2/3 of the blueprint is a tea house, a living room, a terrace, and a dining room. And that's where the public would be gathering. And on the left of that, next to the living room, is a woman's dressing room. And also a little bit further along is a men's dressing room. And then if you move to the 3rd on the right side of the blueprint is the kitchen. And the help's quarters is this little jut out to the front on where there are room for the help there. There's a drying court for the laundry. And also an entry court where trucks or vendors can come and bring things for the dining room and tea house area. So that facility for 1/3 of the building on the right is basically institutional kitchen and help and support services for the rest of the building.
This is incredible. So this is essentially the service elevator of the gatehouse, the service
Yes.
court right here, where they would have deliveries done. Then we have all kinds of rooms over here. Lodging was already part of the plan.
Well, it was lodging for the help, though. As far as I can tell, there is no overnight lodging for the public. I think it was intended only as housing for the people that worked in the dining room or the tea house. And then on the left side, over by the stable, are some rooms there, and I think that was intended to be overnight lodging for the help for the stables.
Okay, so we also have a view here of a couple of, it's east end elevation and the entrance elevation.
Mhm.
So this bottom, the entrance elevation, this is what would have been facing the road as it
Yes.
is on MDI now. Okay.
Yeah.
And did Atterbury draw this? Was this his?
We think so. It's a little fuzzy. These drawings supposedly are at the Rockefeller Archive Center. They were unearthed by William Riley and Roxana Brous when they did the study on the rehab of the carriage roads in the late 80s. They found these plans and elevations at that time. I have been unable to track them down. So we're using, for this article, we have used a copy of the elevations that Roxana and William Riley had in that book that they did on the carriage roads. Somewhere they exist, and we think they're hand-drawn, and we think they were hand-drawn by Grosvenor Atterbury.
Awesome. So these are also the cover of Chebacco Volume 23, which is the one that is coming out in a couple of months. So we were excited to offer a sneak peek of that a couple of weeks ago. So this is going to be on the cover. Now, why was this gatehouse different from the others? The other two were built and this one wasn't. Why do you think that was?
Well, it was complex. First of all, as I mentioned, it's not housing for a gatekeeper. This is a public facility. And so by the 1930s, well, let's back up a minute. This was being thought of probably first around the latter part of the teens, maybe let's just say 1915, it was started in everyone's thoughts. Also, Jordan Pond House existed from the late 1890s forward. So the idea of a tea house is not novel to MDI. Jordan Pond House was very popular, and it was smack dab in the middle of the park, and people used it. And they did have some lodging, I believe, at some point on the top floors of the Jordan Pond House. But anyway, the idea of a tea house is already in people's minds. 1915, we're starting to think about some public facilities that could anchor and be part of the carriage road system that Mr. Rockefeller and with the help of Atterbury are conceiving. So these were supposed to be public facilities. Well, that means you can't just put them up on your property and open the door. You are subject to some new rules and regulations, and you also are subject to public opinion, and you have local authorities. And in this case, you also could potentially have federal authorities from the park who are looking at what you're doing. So Mr. Rockefeller had a multi-layered project here. It was very different than what he had at the other two gatehouses. And I don't know if you want to speak to this, Jenna, but this is my scrawl. The white scrawl.
We love this scrawl, Betsy.
It's my scrawl on a Google satellite view of the northern end of Eagle Lake. And as you see over on the left is the parking lot that we know across the street is there. And then if you move down the road, those white lines that you see on the map are what the lodge would have looked like there. And just to the right of that is part of what Mr. Rockefeller ran into. And this, I think, ultimately was the Achilles heel of the project. This is the intake water pipe for the Bar Harbor water system. And during the 30s, there was a great concern about having healthy water, as there is always. But this was now a public response to having clean water in Bar Harbor. It was no longer wells in everyone's backyard. There was some public water district, and there was a public water district, as there were in other towns on the island, and they were important to maintaining public health. There was a public health officer in Bar Harbor. And when Mr. Rockefeller proposed this building, he actually was going to tap into that water pipe. And he was also going to be building a driveway across water company land. So he immediately drew the scrutiny of the water district and also the people in the community who felt that their new and modern water system was going to be threatened. And this unleashed a torrent of letters to the editors, bickering, because many of the water district trustees were summer people who were friends of Mr. Rockefeller's. So it sort of started a perfect storm of conflicting values here, of what is the public good? What is the purpose of this building that's going in next to something whose purpose is public health? And should we be doing anything that threatens that? And I think by the 1930s, the knowledge and the science of clean water was very different than it was in 1915 when this was first thought of. And there was a different mindset about what projects in the park and what they are and how they're related to the public good. So the simple part of it is that Mr. Rockefeller could no longer just build a building, open it up, and give it to the park and assume that everything was going to work. There were authorities that had to be consulted, and the public health officer, who was a local man named Mr. Robertson, became very important because he stomped his foot down and said, no, we're not going to do this. So that's what happened there.
So what if it had just been completely greased wheels and they had built the third gatehouse? What if the third gatehouse would be there? I mean, it's almost 100 years now from those plans. And what am I looking at in this photograph?
Well, this was a photograph that was taken last fall. And if you're coming down McFarland Hill, and on the right, you have the coping stones next to the road. Further on to the left is the entrance to the parking lot. And on your right here, as you look through the trees across that cove, you would be seeing this building. And you would be seeing a 4-story building that is made out of stone and brick, and it has cupolas, and it has steep roofs, slate roofs, and that would be your vision coming down the hill. So it would have a major impact on what we know as that lovely area, which is very congested right now. And so you can really put that layer on top of this as well. If you had a public facility abutting the road on the right side, what that would also bring to the congestion in the area now. So if it were there now, we would know it, and it would have changed that pristine view.
Yes, and also, as you said, there is a parking lot right now for visitors to the carriage roads. And you had mentioned that there was plans to be a parking lot there, but with this large structure and that turnaround at the entrance to drop off visitors to the tea house and the lodge, and then that service entrance with all of those vehicles and carriages going in and out of there, it would have definitely changed traffic in this area. So how did you first pick up on this third gatehouse? Where did you catch the trail?
Catch the drift.
Yes.
Well, I had seen recently, I think within the last five years, there was an article in the Friends of Acadia Journal about the 3 gatehouses. And so I was aware that there was a gatehouse. And in the bequest of David Rockefeller, when he passed away in 2017, his bequest to the Land and Garden Preserve was a small building on Peabody Drive. It's a small farmhouse. I believe the address is either 257 or 275 Peabody Drive. And that house was given to the Land and Garden Preserve. And in that house was purchased by the Rockefeller family in 1916. And since that time had been the office for the Green Rock Company and also for the JDR Junior Engineering Company. And the house still had many of the papers of the Rockefeller family projects from 1916 forward. Much of the correspondence and a lot of the financial affairs, et cetera, had been pulled from the building, and those papers were taken in 1960, shortly after JDR Jr. died. Those papers went to the Rockefeller archives in Tarrytown, but a lot of the papers were still there. So I was asked to help the garden preserve, sort, inventory, and identify what was in that house. And many of the papers were on shelves or rolled up in boxes and had not moved for a long time. And I found over 1,200 documents. It was like Christmas morning for me. I mean, it was wonderful. And what I found was a roll of 14 blueprints for the Eagle Lake Lodge. And they were in beautiful condition. They were rolled, so I had to be careful, unrolling them, but incredibly good shape. And it really just piqued my interest. Even though I knew there had been such a plan, here were the plans. And so that's what got me going. And with the permission of the Land and Garden Preserve, I was able to copy some of these plans and also to continue research and get more information for the article.
That's great. I love how historical research is a process of discovery that really leads to countless what ifs. They pop up all the time. We did have a question that just popped up. Did you learn anything about how they intended to deal with all the wetlands in that area?
Yes, there are some plans that there are plot plans and engineering plans that show where the buildings were going to be, and then also some of the mitigation for those lands that was going to be done given the construction that was going to be placed on them. So my answer is yes, there is some information and it's in the plans. As far as environmental impact and things like that, those weren't the words that were being used at the time. I would say it's more, what can we move where to minimize impact. And the papers that I found at the Garden Preserve are destined to go to Tarrytown and be in the Rockefeller archives. So I would assume that all of the plans that I was working with that I'm discussing today will be in the public domain as soon as we can get COVID under control and I can get there.
Great. So another question here, what consideration for the existing Brewer Ice Company operation that would have neighbored the gatehouse to the west?
Yeah, I found nothing. Now, there may be something in correspondence, and that correspondence might be at Tarrytown about that. However, this plan was further east than that. So when Rockefeller was buying some of those ice company properties, at the junction there, it's actually in this slide is where we're probably looking at that. He was purposely putting the lodge further to the east. Now, I don't know what his thinking was at the time.
Okay, I also have a comment here. According to your rough map, the proposed structure was located between the boat launch road and the more recent water company access road to the east, where there is enough space for the building.
That's correct.
I do not think it would fit on the point to the southwest of the boat launch, which is what is shown in the recent photo, or it would have been a real squeeze.
Yes, and I actually originally thought it was right there. And so I went out and I walked the property after I had looked at the plot plan more carefully. And you are correct at that point we're seeing it would be a tough squeeze, but you will see the roof lines. The roof lines definitely would be above the tree line now, and I don't know what the tree line was then. So I think evidence of the building would definitely be peeking through and over, particularly this time of the year when some of the tree cover is open.
Great. Okay. Well, that's all the questions that we had. So, and we are at 5 o'clock, which is perfect. Betsy, this was incredibly interesting. Thank you for doing that research, for writing an article for Chebacco, and for appearing on Chebacco Chats today. So we have coming up on Chebacco Chats, We have Roberto Rodriguez on the Boston Automobile Company. We have Jennifer Steen Brewer on her research and art behind her photo essay, We Change with Them. And then at the end of the month, we have a very special commemoration episode with the Southwest Harbor Public Library. That's on March 31st, and we will be starting at 4 p.m. We will be talking about Ralph Stanley, who I'm sure many of you know, citizen historian and lifelong learner. So if you would like to watch Chebacco Chats after they air, we have them on our website, www.mdihistory.org/tobacco-chats. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to info@mdihistory.org. And if you are not a member and you would like to get a copy of Chebacco when it comes out this May, you can also join and become a member on our website, www.mdihistory.org/membership. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again, Betsy, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Take care.